collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up this week, one presidential candidate explains how he will implement the policies he's outlined in his manifesto.
How do we bring about transparency and due process? Perhaps the first thing that one has to look at is the notion of capital statement. Where did you get the money, Mr. MP? When you got in, you had X, now you have triple X. So where did this money come from?
Delays by the planning department are stymieing efforts to get hospice services back up and running in Paphos.
It took us about a year to get the Ministry of Health to agree our plans, and at the moment the planning application is in the planning department and there is some confusion over giving us the change of use.
And you're invited to the Apple Festival this weekend in Kiperunda.
They can taste the products from apples, fresh apple juice, apple pies, paluze from apple juice. It's different than grape juice.
Independent presidential candidate Achilleas Demetriades held a press conference last week where he announced how he was going to implement some of the policies he has outlined. He joins us now. Achilleas, this is refreshing because so far we've heard pretty well all the candidates say things like we're going to fight corruption, but none of them have actually come forward to say how they plan to do it. But you have, so how do you plan to do? Let's start with that.
Well, thank you very much, Rosie. It's lovely to talk about this matter with you because it's something that it's very dear to me. The idea of an honest state, a state that has transparency and the organs of the state operate without any corruption and with respect to the citizens is what I would like to bring about. But let's come to the practical things. How do we bring about transparency and due process? Perhaps the first thing that one has to look at is the notion of capital statement. Where did you get the money, Mr. MP? When you got in, you had X, now you have triple X. So where did this money come from? And this should be implemented on a yearly basis. And it shouldn't just be for you, it should be for your spouse or your partner as well as your kids. Because it's well known that a lot of this money goes on to kids or even mother-in-laws, if I may say that, as well. So I think that's the first issue that has to be dealt with. And there was a very good proposal by Bissaridis, Panagiotidis and Sirimis. These are prominent economists or accountants who have dealt in this matter and have prepared a draft, which I think the House of Representatives would well serve Cypriot society by adopting it and making it into law. So I think that's point one.
Can I just say that their proposals are actually now a couple of years old, as I recall, and nothing has been done about it.
Right, nothing has really been done. I know there's a subcommittee in the House that's discussing this possibility, but I haven't really seen the report. What I have trust in is the knowledge of these three people who have some wisdom in this area and are operating on a non-partisan level, on a very professional level, if I may say so. And I think those recommendations should be implemented because they are the ones that would actually give effect to this notion of tell us where you found the money, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so.
That would have to go through Parliament, be passed into law by Parliament.
Yes.
And of course, I'll try not to smile, but an awful lot of the people who would rather this didn't come to pass are actually sitting in our Parliament.
Well, yes, this is our Parliament. People voted the Parliament. We have to respect that. That's a democratic right that people have. And with this Parliament, I am hoping that because of the presidential election and the pressure that will be generated by the public, such legislation could very well pass before the election takes place, because it's something for which a lot of people are very concerned about and need to do something. So I think the law is before the House Committee. The House should discuss it. They should take this proposal, which I find very useful and effective, and turn it into law. And that way we could have a good start from the where did you find it type of question. The next question is conflict of interest. We really need to have a code of conduct in relation to conflict of interest that binds not only ministers but also the president himself, because we need to have transparency, we need to have people understanding that you can't sit on a council of ministers where your relative or business associate applies for golden passports that are for his or her client, and you simply approve the application. So these notions of conflict of interest are extremely important and interesting, and one has to deal with it in order to secure that we have transparency and there is little corruption.
Well, can I just say as well, how far would that extend to civil servants? Because the problem in Cyprus is that, as you know, almost everybody is somehow related to everybody else, and we have a very large civil service, so it must be almost impossible to have somebody making decisions that doesn't somewhere down the line possibly have a relative or somebody that might benefit.
Yes, obviously there's a small place and that's a possibility, but that cannot be a reason not to apply the system of conflict of interest in a very strict form at the level of ministers, deputy ministers, director generals and directors of departments, which have to abide by this. Of course, in the civil service there is the notion of conflict of interest. Of course it hasn't been served very well, and that's why we have a lot of problems. But that brings me into the regulation or the supervision, if you like, of independent officers of the state, that on the one hand get appointed by the president, but on the other hand have a role to supervise the executive power by being independent and enforcing the rule of law. And such independent officers are the Attorney General, the Auditor General, the Accountant General, and these people have a duty to follow up and protect the state from the abuses that the executive power may be making. And perhaps we should make a historical note here. You will recall that Cyprus was a bicommunal state. In 1963, the Turkish Cypriots decided to leave, and we won't get into that. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the checks and balances that our constitution had created were based on the two communities. If the one community leaves, then the other community has, in terms of the president, nearly absolute power. And that power must be curtailed in order to have checks and balances in the system. And the way to approach this is in the appointment of these officers. There needs to be a radical new approach. There is no need to change the law in respect of the officers that are appointed under the Constitution, because my suggestion is a custom or a convention that the president has to impose on himself by saying that whenever I will appoint these independent officers, I will go to the House of Representatives and I will ask for their opinion, non-binding, which will be the result of a public hearing. And one would hope that just like public hearings before the Senate in the United States or the European Parliament take the position of an interrogation or an examination of these candidates, this will be achieved because the House will exert certain pressure and there will be a selection of questions that will be asked, and this scrutiny in a public hearing will avoid appointing people who are not capable of serving or have issues that need to come up and the public should know about.
Well, that's very important, isn't it, when you look at the way that some of the appointments to the semi-government organisations take place, because you get people in charge of departments that have no understanding, it seems, or any history of working in that sector, and they just go and sit at the top table.
Well, they are appointed, and I think there are two issues there. One is, how are these people appointed? And at least for the heads of the boards of directors or whatever board or whatever body is coordinating, there should be also hearings before the House of Representatives. We may need to amend the law, but by convention the president can do it, but also I think we need to introduce a system whereby citizens, people who are interested in taking up this job, should be able to write to the executive authority and say, I am interested to run for this, here is my CV, can you please consider it? And then we can have a board which would consider this matter on a technical level. And for example, if you want to go to the telecommunications authority, a basic understanding of telecommunications or electrical engineering would be a must. I mean, if you are a marine biologist, I think you would not serve well the telecommunications authority, even though you'd have a great job in saving the environment and the sea. But we need to really do something about that. And get some expertise pulled in, and perhaps a committee of wise men, of wise people, actually, to be politically correct, could deal with this and have a filter whereby anyone can apply and his application can be considered, because there are people out there who are interested in serving, and their applications should be considered.
And who have the qualifications.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's another area. So we need to do that for the independent officers under the constitutions, independent officers under law. We can amend the law to have this kind of checks and balances come in. And perhaps the biggest or most radical need is the justice area, because the delays in the justice system are inexcusable. You cannot have 5, 6, 7, 8 years to get a judgment out of the first instance court and then go on appeal and get another 5, 6 years to finish with it. You cannot compete with Ireland, for example, where in 6 months the commercial court will adjudicate on your case and you have 10 to 12 years for the matter to be dealt with in Cyprus. It's again a question of competitiveness of the country, but it also, I think, touches the fabric of democracy on our island, because delayed justice is not just a personal matter anymore. It's not justice delayed is justice denied. I think we go one level up, and here it is justice delayed is democracy denied, because the matter is so widespread that actually the fabric of our society and the way democracy operates is affected.
Has anybody ever worked out what the cost to the country is of these delays?
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's been an actual study. I actually know the cost because I suffer the consequences every day I go to court, and I see that. And perhaps what is radical and what needs to be dealt with is that we break the problem down into its two components. One is to restore confidence in the system. And in order to restore confidence in the system, you have to build it and give it the speed with which you expect it to operate in the future. And so new cases will have to have a fast track, which will be the 6 to 12 month resolution time. And then for the backlog, you go out and you hire expertise and services and you clean the backlog. But it is of paramount importance to get the country back on track and increase the speed of the award of justice, because it doesn't affect individual rights only, it affects the fabric of our society.
The other thing that I think you talked about was this business of double pensions. Now we see the same faces from being an MP to becoming a mayor, and then from retiring as a mayor, and you thought retired, being hired by the government as a special advisor on something else, and they get a pension for every job they've done, don't they?
I think the pension issue is ridiculous. I mean, we really have to have a provision in the law that says we can only have one pension, perhaps the highest one, so that we are fair. And the fact that you did 2 or 3 other jobs shouldn't really change the amount that you are getting. So that is the abolition of various unreasonable privileges that certain officers enjoy. Those have to do perhaps with the limousines that one wants to buy for ministers or deputy ministers. There was a case about a week or 2 ago. They were going to buy 2 new limousines of about 65,000 euros each, and in fact, in the end, after some pressure from the civil society, the House of Representatives rejected the purchase, which was good. But we really have to have some sort of committee that will look at this and abolish them and you can abolish them for the future, for the new ones, and for the other ones you need to phase them out somehow in order to be fair in how taxpayers' money is being given out, because at the end of the day it's a taxpayers' money that you're dealing with, and one has to be very stingy with the way this money is given out.
Well, and I think that there's also on record a lot of cases where the people who at the moment enjoy those limousines use them for personal things rather than only for when they're on the job.
Oh yeah, I mean, why can't we have a carpool? There's a carpool for every minister, and they have to plan the week and order a car, and like they do in Brussels, if you need to do it. There is a carpool for officials. Why does the car have to take the kids to school or go fetch the shopping? Why does that have to be the case? So I think there is a lot of room for improvement. There is a lot of scrutiny that requires application, and that will do away with a number of these unreasonable privileges that are applicable. I also want to do something on the respect of private life. You remember the black van and the telephone tapping? That was hushed up in Cyprus. In the end, there was something like 975,000 administrative fine, and then in the criminal case the natural persons got away with it scot-free, and then the company got a 25,000 fine. So that I don't think was dealt with properly. In fact, the scandal broke out in Greece. It is now in the European Parliament being examined, and I would not be surprised if it comes back to Cyprus and looks for these problems. But that begs the question of where is the law to regulate telephone tapping by the state? And the answer is there is no such law. Of course you need to have it for national security, for prevention of crime, and then you give certain power to a court normally, or to an independent authority for which the executive power applies to, and then everybody else is excluded from tapping. What we have now is a government which has the capability of doing it and applies at will, and we have no system to supervise this. And that's scary, if I may use that expression, because private life and privacy of communication is pretty sacred in my mind, and that shouldn't be affected in the way that it's happening, or in the way that we've seen it happen. So these are really the issues that have to be dealt with, and I think corruption has reached alarming levels. I mean, you look at the indicators from the EU, you look at the indicators from the World Bank in the last 10 years, it's ridiculous where we are. And I mean, simple things. You used to travel abroad and you'd say you're from Cyprus and you'd hear good words. Now you travel abroad, you say you're from Cyprus, and they say, yeah, are you selling a passport? Could I buy one? I mean, that is a joke on the country. And this administration has got us to that level. We need to get rid of this administration. We need to get some new phases in. We need to clean up our act, give some prospect to our country, and solve the Cyprus problem as well.
We haven't even touched on that, but can I just ask you how all of this was received and what questions came back at you when you talked to the press last week?
Well, it was well received, I think, because most people published it and there was a lot of discussion. Few questions, I may say, because at the time, I guess, there were other issues being dealt with. But I think the biggest question is, how are you going to do this? That's really the big question. And the answer is political will. If the people give you a mandate and elect you at the highest office, you have the moral high ground and the legal power to take action on the points I have raised without even having to go to Parliament. For the President to accept that for the appointments of the independent officers, he will submit himself to a public hearing of the candidate before the House of Representatives requires no change of law. The House, of course, may say we don't want to, but I think the House will rise to the occasion and carry out a scrutiny through a public hearing, which can only do good for the candidate that is propose to be appointed. So there are ways of doing it, and we don't always have to change the law. Of course, sometimes you do, and I think the mandate of a president will allow that. And don't forget, no president commands a majority before the House. We are a presidential democracy. We're not a parliamentary democracy, so we don't have a prime minister who commands the majority before the House. This is how the system worked all these years. This is how the system can continue to work, but it needs to address the issue of corruption in order to clean up this country.
That is independent presidential candidate Achilleas Demetriades on the hows and whys of some of his proposed policies.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Palliative care is of prime importance to anybody involved in any way whatsoever with people who suffer from cancer. Now, in the Paphos district, there have been hospices in the past, but there's a slight problem because I believe that the Friends Hospice has had to move, but they're having a bit of trouble actually getting the permissions to go ahead and open up a new premises. The president of the Friends Hospice Foundation is Chris Jones. He joins us now. Chris, can you tell us what exactly the problem is? Because my understanding from things I've read online is that you had to close the premises you were operating from, but somebody gave you a house so that you could move and start up again.
Absolutely correct. We first opened in 2006. And between that time and when we had to close in 2019 because of COVID and we ran out of funding, and our home in one of the hospitals in Paphos wanted to become a YESI hospital, so we had to close at that point. But up until that point, we had looked after about 2,000 patients, free of charge, 70% of them Cypriots. Then a generous local resident gave us a 9-bedroom house in extensive grounds, free of charge, without rent, without anything. The lease is ours for as long as it remains a hospice. No strings, nothing. It took us about a year to get the Ministry of Health to agree our plans. We have circulated near neighbours to see if anyone objected, had no objections. And at the moment, the planning application is in the planning department, and there is some confusion over giving us the change of use. We have almost all the funding necessary to complete the project, but we are hamstrung because we can't start work. And our huge fear is that our money is safe, but inflation is starting to eat into it. And more importantly, there are patients from all over the Paphos district who need our help. We would have 6 beds, and we're unable to give them the help they require. And Rosie, I find it heartbreaking.
Yes, it does sound very frustrating. But you've been given a property, nobody nearby objects to it being a hospice. So what permission do you actually need to put the beds in there, presumably staff it, and then get moving?
I think at the heart of it is the lack of understanding of the difference between a hospice, where there are no huge medical interventions, no ambulances coming and going, no hearses coming and going, and a hospital. And because the phrasing is that we are going to become a clinic, it's a residential area, and I think there is some misunderstanding over what the nature of our hospice is. And this is why we are trying desperately to educate the Cypriot population. As I say, 70% of our patients are Cypriots, and they really appreciate what we do. They are among our most ardent supporters, but the public at large do not understand the concept, and I do believe there's this feeling you don't want to think about the end of your life while you're living it. So we're not cuddly if you know what I mean.
No, all right, Chris, but the point is it's not the public that's holding this up,
No.
it's government departments. So
Yeah.
I can't understand why the planning department isn't just saying you've done all the homework, go ahead.
Nor can I, which is why we are trying to get the public to back us on this, quite frankly.
So what do the planning department say? Because as far as I'm aware, they've been sitting on this application for what, a year?
Yeah, a year.
Well, that's extraordinary. I mean, their job is surely to investigate and then either say yes or say no.
When we sent our letters out, there are 29 dwellings within 100 metres of our house. Several are unoccupied, but of the others, I personally, with the help of a colleague, hand-delivered letters in Greek and in English to every one of those houses. We put a notice in Phileleftheros and in Politis saying about the change of use, and we received no negative comments. In fact, we received 4 positive comments from immediate neighbours, and that was it.
Have you
Now,
shown...
the planning department said they feel maybe they need to go out and ask the question again, but that is likely to take another 6 months, and inflation is still biting whichever way you look at it.
Are the planning department aware of the letters you sent out, and have they seen the replies?
They have seen the letters sent out. They have been given copies of the replies. The replies from the articles in the Pan-Cyprian newspapers went directly to them and not to us. So they should be aware of it, yes.
Well, and they should get a move on. It's quite extraordinary that a government department can hold up something that is so important for the local community. Chris, I wish you the very best of luck and the Friends Hospice, and we'll follow this up if need be, but hopefully that permission will come through much sooner rather than later. Thanks for telling us about it.
Thank you.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
The festival season continues in Cyprus this weekend with the Apple Festival up in the mountains at Kyperunda. From the Community Council, Konstantinos Konstantinou joins us to tell us all about it. Konstantinos, how long has this been going on?
20 years old, the festival. It's 20 years old. We stopped for 2 years due to the pandemic, but now we are back.
And what can people expect if they come up and visit Kyperunda at this time of year?
This is now the autumn period, so they can see it's not only the festival, they can enjoy the cool weather, to visit the churches, museums, everything will be open at the 2 days of the festival, and they can taste many products from apples, fresh apple juice, apple pies. They will taste the famous palouze from apple juice. It's different than grape juice. They do the same with flavor and juice, but they use apple juice, not grape.
And of course, we're famous as well in Cyprus for our vinegar because of the grapes, but you also do apple vinegar, I think.
Yes, it's very famous. In the village, there is a small factory. They have their own farm with apples, and they use the second-hand apples formed by that. Yeah.
So the best apples are used for the pies and other things, but I've also seen jars of apples. Do they make gliko from apples?
Yes, but not all the varieties. Some varieties is good for gliko. It's not all the apples. Every variety is different. Some varieties are for more juicy, are better for juice. Some others are better for pies. Some other gliko. They make gliko with gallant apples, variety gallant, and firikia, variety firikia. Firikia is very small apples, but not with all the variety, because some are not good for gliko because are very juicy.
We don't know any of this when we go round our local supermarket and choose between the apples that we're probably either going to use just for cooking or for eating. But it's not just about the apples, is it? The Apple Festival also has a culture programme. Tell me a bit about that.
Yes, for 2 days, on Saturday, the program will start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We have folkloric dancing from Cyprus and Greece, traditional music from professional artists. On Sunday, the program starts at 11 o'clock in the morning, and we have, again, dancing from traditional dancing groups, and at 9 o'clock, we have a competition, tasting competition from many different apple recipes, and some chefs, they taste and they write down the most famous apple pie or the most famous apple glicot. And the program continues in the afternoon with traditional dance, traditional music, different groups, and they all the day.
So it's really a panairi up in Kiperunda, isn't it?
Yes, all day, for 2 days, yes.
That is this coming weekend, the 8th and 9th of October, Kiperunda's Apple Festival. Our thanks to Konstantinou for telling us all about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.